Okay, recording has started. People should be now registering, Mark.
Right.
Okay, good evening, everybody. As you're registering, I will wait a few more minutes, but in particular, I want to make sure that each and every one of you understands that tonight's webinar is with One Nation leader, Mark Latham, the Honourable Mark Latham MLC. Tonight's program will be pretty much a Q&A type of session. I'll give the opportunity for Mark to say a few words as an introductory comment. And then what we'll do is we'll go straight into a Q&A, which gives us a chance to delve or dig deeper into some of the issues that are likely to come up. The other thing is too, I must tell everybody that this webinar is being recorded. We've got well over 150 people registered, I believe, and they're all over from New South Wales, obviously. So I do ask you to feel free to type any questions in the pardon me, in the Q&A or in the chat box, and I'll try and get those questions asked depending on how we're traveling. But in particular, please keep an eye on the chat board, and if you like, just contact me and I will make sure that we'll get your questions answered. All right, well, let's make a start. It is now 7:01. I'd like to introduce the Honourable Mark Latham MLC, member of the Legislative Council. The elections, of course, are on Saturday, 25th of March. Mark, I'd like to give you the opportunity. You've had a wonderful history in politics. Just tell us a little bit about the ideology of One Nation, and then let me know what you've got to offer for the electors. In particular, Mark, what you've got to offer the Christian voters at this particular election. So over to you, Mark. A brief introductory comment. Okay. Over to you, Mark.
My first speech in Election. That is, I am a Christian. And you got me there?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yep.
Yeah. So I said in my first speech in the New South Wales Parliament 4 years ago, no one should be afraid to say four of the most glorious words in the history of our civilization, I am a Christian. Now, why did I say that? Well, in a way you couldn't have anticipated 20 years ago. Christianity has come under attack. It's now sneered at in popular left-wing culture. We saw that on the project recently with their outrageous, disgusting joke. We see it in the denigration of high-profile people like Margaret Court, Israel Folau, but also the little people out there as well in the suburbs and regions. Christianity is under attack in a way that really diminishes us all. Christianity is one of the essential pillars of our civilization. Where do we get our sense of right and wrong, good and bad in society? We get it from the Ten Commandments, the teachings of Jesus Christ from the Bible. And our agenda at One Nation, we're a party for all Australians, but in particular, we stand up strong for those being attacked by the woke left-wing elements who want to roll back the best elements of our civilization. So we've got four agenda items that we fight hard on, particularly in the next term of Parliament. The first of those is the religious freedom or religious anti-discrimination bill that I moved in the last term. That's in really good shape. It went through a joint select committee that wanted to progress it, but as usual, Liberal and National Party were too weak. Labor voted against it, but it's in really good shape, much needed to give Christians, people of other faith organisations, the protection they need under New South Wales anti-discrimination laws. And the second item is the parental rights bill. The parental rights have been diminished in the school system in particular. We want to ban the teaching of gender fluidity. We want to give parents improved rights. The school must always tell them significant things happening with their children, particularly if it involves transgender. No good ever comes from keeping parents in the dark. Parents have got to know what's coming up in the curriculum. They've got to be declared as the primary educators of children, and they've got to have a legal right to take their children out of classes that don't accord with their ethical, moral and religious values. So, that's an important piece of legislation as well. I'm a big supporter of parental rights, and we need to entrench that in law in New South Wales. The other two items are kind of defensive, blocking things that Alex Greenwich, this insidious green independent inner city guy, keeps advancing with the support of Perrottet and Minns. The first of those is a huge worry. They started out saying it was a ban on gay conversion therapy, but then they rolled out the full alphabet, LGBTQI, so on and so on. And the key letter there is transgender. So Greenwich, Perrottet and Minns are going to make it illegal for a parent, a religious advisor, a counsellor, to sit down a 13-year-old girl who says, I want to be a boy, and say, hang on, can we take a step back here and look at some of the case studies of girls your age who went down this path with the drugs and the surgery, and it turned out to be a disaster, and can we learn from those case studies? So that would be a natural, loving, caring reaction by any parent. They're going to ban it. They're going to make it illegal. This is the greatest attack on parental rights in the history of New South Wales. And Perrottet and Minns are supporting this lunacy. It's hard to believe. We'll be fighting that with everything we've got in the coming period. Because I can't believe that the Liberal Party, well, I suppose I can believe it, the Liberal Party is no longer the Liberal Party of old. It's full of woke lefties, and they've rolled over to Greenwich with that ban on so-called transgender conversion therapy, to the point where parents talking to their own child, not Perrottet's child, not Chris Minns' child, their own child, are going to be declared illegal. And the final item again from Greenwich is to end the exemption for non-government schools under the Anti-Discrimination Act. There's no evidence of discrimination in the non-government schools, which are doing a great job across the board. But if we end the exemption, you can be sure the gay activists will be taking schools down there. They knock back some gay guy for a job on merit, but he says it was on the basis of sexual discrimination. You can take them for the first time ever to the human rights tribunals, all the cost and worry and legalism that the school's got to go through. So to entry to toilets, it'll even come under the coverage of a 15-year-old boy says, I'm a girl, I want to go to the girls' toilet. Again, the LGBT alphabet activists will pile in to say he's got to be given the right to go to the girls' toilet. Now, we don't want non-government schools to be tied up in all those legal costs, all the worry, the public vilification by alphabet activists who are doing it not because it's valid, but just because they can and they were allowed to do it by the New South Wales Parliament. So, Greg, thanks for having me on here this evening. There are our 4 items, 2 of them proactive, 2 of them defensive against very bad proposals, proposals put forward by the same guy who did the euthanasia and the abortion laws in New South Wales. So let's hope next time we have a lot more success than we did for those 2.
Okay, thank you, Mark. All right, look, a couple of things quickly. One Nation is having candidates in the upper house and the lower house. How many in the lower house have you got standing, Mark?
17 around the state. We don't put up just names on the ballot paper. These are real candidates running real campaigns, mainly in Western Sydney and the Hunter Valley, where we've had stronger votes in the past. So that's our approach. 17 is not a huge number, but they're really good candidates, and I think in some places they'll play a big role in determining who's in government.
Okay. With those candidates, Mark, did they choose their own preferences, or was there a One Nation policy on where the preferences would go?
It was a One Nation policy. We don't allocate preferences.
Right.
Our voters don't like preferences. We've handed out in the past at every polling booth, and 75% of our voters under optional preferential in New South Wales just vote one. They don't allocate preferences, and then of the other 25%, 15% tend to go to the coalition, 10% to Labor. And again, there's more people here who don't follow our ticket. So the preferences are only ever a recommendation, but we're a party that respects the wishes of our supporters. Our voters tend to be thinking people, and they've thought it through, and they don't like allocating preferences under optional preferential. We respect that, and we ask everyone just to vote one for One Nation in the lower house, where you've got one of those 17 candidates, and one above the line in the upper house, my group Q, where I'm heading the ticket, and obviously we're hoping to grow our numbers from 2 to a bigger contingent in the New South Wales upper house.
Thank you, Mark. You raise an interesting point here, because I got an email from a couple of so-called gurus in voting, and they're actually probably confirming what you just said, that it's probably pointless numbering 15 candidates under the line. We're talking about the upper house now. Would you obviously agree with that, do you, Mark?
Well, it's easier, and you're going to maximise your formal vote. People cast the valid vote and have a bigger say if they just number the one square above the line. So when you get the One Nation how to vote in those 17 seats, one square in the lower house, one square above the line in the upper house, all you have to do is 1+1. And if we haven't got a lower house One Nation candidate, you just need to go Group Q above the line in the upper house, again, nice and easy. So you can have a go at the 15 if that's how you like to do it. But, you know, I'll tell you how I voted. I just went one above the line and it was all over in 3 seconds.
Yeah, make it easy. That's good. Mark, a couple of questions. What do you think, as you know, Reverend Fred Knoll is now retiring at these elections. He's been after 40
Well, no, he's not.
years.
He's running. He's on the ticket.
He's on the ticket, but
he's nominated number 2 to his wife on the upper house ticket.
I think we have to be realistic that he'll be retiring, Mark.
Well, he will be retiring, I know, but he's against everyone's comprehension. He's nominated as a candidate. He saw him collapse, and Fred's, you know, obviously got on a fair bit in years, and everyone thought he'd just take it easy, but he's bobbed up on the ballot paper.
Given that, anyway, I mean, then you've got the so-called his wife Sylvana Knoll standing. But the point I want to make here is that you know, if you look at the elections, 2015, 2019, the Christian Democratic Party has lost a lot of the Christian support and voters. And in particular, now that there isn't a Christian Democratic Party, which of course went bust in March 2022, in your opinion, someone has to fill that void. Now, there's been a suggestion, even from me, that void is likely to go to, rather than independents, but somebody like One Nation, Liberal Democrats, maybe perhaps the Shooters or somebody. Do you have a view on where that void will be, you know, likely to be picked up?
One Nation has the track record of standing up on religious rights, parental rights, and the issues I mentioned earlier on. So, yeah, the CDP collapsed. There's no party registered now like that. There's some random groups on the ballot paper that aren't a political party. No one's ever been elected to the upper house unless you've got that registered party. You've gone to the trouble of forming a party, and it's acknowledged by the Electoral Commission. The Liberal Democrats, I don't think many Conservatives are going to support their policy for full drug legalisation. I mean, they're a laissez-faire party. If you want to take as many drugs as you like, bring in as many people from overseas as you like. They're a free-for-all type party. You know, there's a room space for libertarians, of course, but I can't see many Christian Conservatives supporting a party of that ilk. So I think One Nation stands out as the logical fighter on these important civilizational and Christian issues, and our track record is pretty good. And I think, you know, if you vote for One Nation, there's no white flag, there's no surrender. We fight 100% all the time, and you get pretty good value for your vote.
Mark, on that, I tend to agree that One Nation will pick up I suggest, a large proportion of that void left by Fred Knoll's Christian Democratic Party. But my question to you is, what are some of your economic hip pocket type issues that you're going to be looking at in the new term of government?
Oh, we've got the best policies for bringing down the power bills. We believe in increasing the gas production and supply in New South Wales. That brings down the price of gas. New South Wales is only 5% gas self-sufficient, which is disgraceful, really. We've got it all in the ground. We've got to use it at a time where the prices have gone through the roof and families are really hurting. And on electricity, we've got the policies for energy security. Labor, Liberal, National and Greens have put all their eggs in the renewables basket. We want a flourishing supply of electricity from nuclear, coal, gas and renewables. So 4 is better than 1. 4 sources are better than 1. The more supply, the lower the price. So there's other things that need to be done. Matt Keane's spending a lot of money on the renewables. He's levied $138 million electricity tax, a 5% increase on a $1,000 bill. We'd abolish that as an immediate relief for working families, for household power bills. So that's very important. And keeping the lights on. I mean, we've got these predictions from the Australian Energy Market Operator, the blackouts in New South Wales, which is an economic and social disaster. It drives investment away from our state. Who'd invest here if we can't keep the lights on? So the keen, green, renewables energy rush, doing it all 100% in 10 years, is looming as a real disaster. And we want to put a halt to that and get back to the time when Australia wonderfully had the cheapest and most reliable power in the world.
Mm. It's interesting you mentioned Matt Keane. I've had representation made to me that people are not voting the coalition because Matt Keane, as the Energy Minister Treasurer, is actually turning off traditional Conservative voters. Now, is that something you've experienced within Parliament yourself in terms of colleagues and representation you've had that, you know, there's been a shift?
It's not just Keane. There's a whole cohort there of green type ministers. Keane's very green. And I always say, if you close your eyes and listen to the speeches of Keane, Mark Speakman, Rob Stokes, Brad Hazzard, you might as well be in the Green Party room. So the Liberal Party has lurched to the left. It's no longer the party of John Howard or Nick Greiner. A lot of people don't recognise it. You know, I've heard Alan Jones, a stalwart of the Liberal Party, say there is no Liberal Party anymore. So Matt Keane supported the green energy. They're now doing a preference deal with the Greens in seats of Balmain, Summerhill and Port Macquarie. So green energy, green preferences from the Liberals. Every second word from the coalition is green. And obviously there's a lot better policies than the people who run the Greens. And on the other side, Labor, you're worried that Labor and the Greens will be an alliance in the lower house. The Greens with their policies for drug legalisation, gender fluidity, teaching, closing coal and gas yesterday, bringing on the blackouts and the price hikes. We've got to push back against the Green agenda. And if Matt Keane is doing it, I'd strongly advise the Liberal Party to get rid of him. And I tell you, that's what the voters are telling us.
Yeah, I think that's the message I'm getting. Mark, back to you remember I appeared before your committee during the last term of Parliament. Are you going to reintroduce the religious freedom bill that you had? Because I think that's such a critical element in terms of what's happening in federal, which I'll get to in a minute. But is there every possibility of that happening?
Yeah, that's a certainty. We'll reintroduce it and push it. New South Wales is one of only two states with South Australia that hasn't got religious anti-discrimination laws. So, you know, why are Christians and other people of faith and faith organisations protected in other states like Queensland and Victoria, but not in New South Wales? So it's a real gap in our legislative framework. So yeah, I'll be reintroducing that for sure.
So how will that work? As you know, the federal government has had a review. There's been a lot of representation made, submissions made. But in my reading of that review, I think that what you've really got there is an outcome that's going to be predetermined by the wishes of Labor. I just want to make sure that whatever you do will actually achieve what it's meant to achieve rather than what the federal government's suggesting, which is going to be an outcome that they've determined. And I don't think Christian schools will be any better off under what Labor's proposing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we want to keep the exemption for Christian schools.
Yes.
Being attacked under the Anti-Discrimination Act in New South Wales, the examples I gave earlier of the teacher and also the kids' toilets. We don't want those attacks on non-government schools. There's no evidence of discrimination by non-government schools in those areas. So if there's no problem, what are you trying to solve? What they're trying to do is get the alphabet activists to attack non-government schools and rack up new costs and worry and legalism at the tribunals. So we don't want that, but we do want a religious freedom bill, and New South Wales needs it. And no matter who's in power, I'll be having a crack at it in the upper house. It's in good shape. The Joint Select Committee improved it. We've got a number of parliamentarians who support it, and with increased One Nation numbers, hopefully we'll be able to use some leverage to get a bit more support than we did last time.
Yeah, interesting, because both the Premier, Mr. Perrottet, and of course the Opposition Leader, Chris Minns, they've both come out to declare that they're Catholics in their faith, which is fine. But one would wonder, given the voting in the past on certain issues like abortion, euthanasia, whether they are actually a biblical worldview type of Christian. The question I have for you is, how do we govern? How do we make sure that votes within the upper house, in particular, where you'll be, I guess, will maintain a social conservative emphasis, because what's happening, and you and I both know, and you in particular, that the Conservative government has been hijacked by the LGBTI alphabet group, and they've caved in. The issue we've got now, Mark, is that even our own leaders who claim to be Christian are voting on in an anti-Christian way. How do we convince the voters out there? And that's why the topic tonight is, how in God's name should we vote? How do we convince them that there is an alternative?
Well, look at our track record for One Nation. We've stood up on religious rights and parental rights. And for Perrottet, Minns and Albanese, they can shout from the rooftops that they're Catholic, but unless they're supporting legislation that actually helps people of faith and faith organisations, well, they're not worth a cracker. And I've got to say, Greg, there's an element of cowardice here. I was at the funeral of George Pell at St Mary's Cathedral, honouring the church, honouring a man who died innocent, honouring someone who had been vilified and targeted by the ABC. And Minns and Perrottet and Albanese were too scared to be there because of the woke media and woke idiots on Twitter. Well, it's a time for stepping forward, not for surrendering and scurrying off in the distance because you're too scared of a bunch of political opponents. So, I stand by my legislation that I've moved, my record on this, and my conviction that it's a time for fighters. And quite frankly, it doesn't matter what people shout from the rooftops. It's what they do in the parliament and how they vote. And Perrottet supporting this Greenwich bill on so-called transgender conversion therapy, this attack on parents and people of faith, religious advisors and leaders, your average parish priest, is just appalling. You know, if that makes you a Catholic politician, I'll tell you what, it's not worth much to the Catholics or anyone else.
Interesting, Mark. I got an email not long ago, well, just after the gay Mardi Gras thing, saying, what is Albanese, the Prime Minister, doing in front of the march? Is that something Prime Ministers ought to be doing, Mark? I know it's a federal issue.
Yeah, I know. Look, it's close to his electorate. He's marched there for many, many years. That's his choice and he'll be judged. My objection is not the fact that people march. They can march up and down the street until they're blue in the face, as far as I'm concerned. I don't like the public money that goes into it. We spent close to $100 million on World Pride Week. There's no evidence of increased tourism or economic benefit, no extra people in the city. You've got basically the same people who come every year for Mardi Gras. I think it's the public money in it that's a waste. I'd rather spend that on hospital emergency departments or on needy social programs, something for the homeless in inner Sydney than on a parade. And some of this stuff's absurd. I debated Alex Greenwich on 2GB where he said days after the Mardi Gras, the big here, because he's inventing new forms of victimhood, the big problem for the LGBTQ community is they're all too scared to go out of their homes because they're attacked all the time, and we've got a vitamin D deficiency. Yeah, well, Alex, you just had tens of thousands of people marching down the street and across the Harbour Bridge the following Sunday. They're not scared to come out of their homes. No one's got a vitamin D deficiency. Greg, they're just making this stuff up. It's hilarious at one level, but when it's publicly funded, it's a waste of money.
Yes, I heard you debate Alex Greenwich on that. Mark, just jump to another sort of a related topic. Chaplaincy is always under threat, in particular, in both religious schools and, of course, public schools. What's your stance on chaplaincy? Is it a lot of the New South Wales education is trying to replace it with ethics courses and moral, but trying to steer people away from chaplaincy. Can you give us an update on the One Nation's approach to the chaplaincy program?
We're big supporters of it, and we don't see any need for changing the traditional approach. It's been a success in our schools. It's appreciated by people of faith, and it should remain. Again, if there's no problem, who's looking for the solution?
No, understood. And I'm pleased to hear you say that because it's something very close to my heart, because I think there's a lot of good work being done with them. I'm an accredited chaplain myself, so I do a lot of work with various community groups. Mark, the other issue I want to look at is, and this is I think you can forget about alcohol sometimes. The real issue, and I've been trying to make this a campaign for many years, is gambling, Mark. What can we do? And in particular, if you're going to have the balance of power, as the predictions may well say, what can we do about gambling to ensure that there are no suicides, families are not left without food and water, housing and shelter? Mark, what can you do to ensure that gambling issue is addressed in New South Wales?
Well, I speak from first-hand experience. I grew up in a household where in public housing, didn't own a car, and gambling basically was the cause of that. Gambling on the horse racing. So I know this. It's like a medical addiction. It's a health issue. You need people to be diverted into counselling programs to deal with their health problem. So I think the first step is not to vilify the community clubs, which do a lot of great work. I was at St Paul's Catholic School in Camden today, and they're getting a $50,000 donation from the Campbelltown Catholic Club for much needed playground equipment. So you can tackle problem gambling without attacking the clubs and the work they do. And in fact, I think this is where the Perrottet plan is deficient, because he's been driven by the sneering of the Teals and Greenwich people who really don't ever go to community clubs and don't know what it's all about. And he's jumped into a plan that is rushed and not thought through properly. And he's at loggerheads with the clubs themselves. Now, I think there's two problems with his plan. One is the gambling addicts are going to set their own gambling limit. Well, what's the point of that? Surely it should be a limit. If they're identified as a gambling addict, it should be a limit that's financially responsible for their family in particular. But the other problem is you can have the limit and they hit it on the pokies. What do you do when they walk 50 metres over to the TAB window and spend even more, 10 times as much on the dogs, the trots, or the horses, or rugby league, or whatever they want to gamble on? So the clubs have got to be there to identify the people who obviously are problem gamblers walking over the TAB window, and grab hold of them and get them into the programs that can deal with their addiction and other things within the club to stop them wasting their money. So you've got to target the problem gamblers rather than the clubs themselves. And you've got to deal with it not beyond the pokies. Like in Perrottet land, in Greenwich land, pokies are the only gambling avenue. Well, hello, what world are they living in? You can gamble online, outlets in Singapore, Asia, all over the world, plus at the TAB window in these clubs, and lose a stack more money than you ever blow on the pokies. So let's get realistic.
So, Mark, do you as One Nation have a strategy, a solution that you'll be proposing to the government?
Yeah, well, we want to work with the clubs to target problem gamblers, get them into the programs, but you can't do that if you're at war with the clubs. Greenwich and Perrottet are not going to be sitting there in the club lounge watching all the gamblers all over New South Wales in many hundreds of clubs. It's ridiculous. They've got to work with the clubs. And I've sat down with the clubs and they say they want the cashless cards. The technology is the way of the future for the clubs, because if you're a member or an associate, you get your cashless card for your drinks, for your food, for your entertainment, and your gaming inside the club. So the cashless cards are coming. Work with the clubs to target the problem gamblers for maximum result. What I see is an attack on the clubs that's actually not going to achieve a lot in terms of actually dealing with problem gambling. It's a bit like the Animal Justice Party that want to ban horse racing and greyhounds. They've never been to the track. At least go and understand what's going on. But these people have never been to the track, and the Greenwich forces and the Teals and Perrottet don't really go to these community clubs, so they don't know what's going on. But if you live in Western Sydney like I have for 57 years, you know a bit about it. And from my own personal background, I know stacks.
Yeah, understood. Mark, one of the biggest issues I know in New South Wales, and I'm really going to write to all the new government heads or leaders, but in particular, I urge you to, the issue about having drag queens in libraries, talking to 5-year-olds, 4-year-olds or whatever. Mark, is there anything we can do to ensure that this does not happen? A public library is for learning, not for ideology. Mark, what
local councils run these libraries, but I think we should write into the child protection laws in New South Wales that it's a form of child abuse for a drag queen story time to be presented in front of 3- and 4-year-olds. Certain things are clearly age inappropriate. These little kids don't know anything about gender and sexuality. They want to, learn about fairy tales and play with blocks and cars and dolls, whatever they fancy. But this sexuality and gender stuff pushed by adults for a political, ideological reason is clearly a form of child abuse. We talk about the mental health problems of the young people. Well, tell a 4-year-old boy he's really a girl and see how you go with confusion and anxiety and mental health. Why are we confusing these kids? instead of allowing children just to be children. So yeah, I'd ban it under child protection laws.
So do you think that has validity, Mark? Is that a real option that we can
my word.
pursue?
Well, we've got to do something. We just can't allow drag queen story time in front of 3 and 4 year olds. You know, and when you read the propaganda as to why it's happening, like when it happened at Manly Council, it's to customise these kids to the reality of LGBT. Well, look, if they want to choose that as adults and do whatever they want, dress up, change their gender, march in the parade as consenting adults, well, you go for it. But 3 and 4 year olds, give me a break. No, it's a form of child abuse, and we need to outlaw it.
Absolutely. Mark, let me turn to something that both the opposition leader, Chris Minns, and the Premier, Mr. Perrottet, has said that they are going to allow the introduction of a bill by Mr. Greenwich again, which is a conversion therapy bill. Now, let me just sort of preface this. That in itself, if they're going to allow that, I think that is a contradiction of their Christian beliefs personally. So, assuming that it gets introduced by Alex Greenwich, assuming that Mr. Minns and Mr. Perrottet approve of it, what is your view as a One Nation and as an individual to allow Christians to pray, observe, say within a reasonable distance of a particular area, say a clinic, or two, allow parents and ministers of the church or counsellors to counsel children in considering conversion? What is the view of One Nation in terms of allowing parents, counsellors, ministers to counsel children considering such a move?
Yeah, it's what I said earlier on, Greg, that One Nation opposes the bill outright, 100%. We will vote against it down the line at every opportunity. And Perrottet and Minns have said, I will allow preachers to preach and pray. But it's not about preaching and praying, it's about counselling. And the greatest invasion of rights is to say to the parent of a 13-year-old girl who wants to be a boy, you're not allowed to sit them down and say to them, let's have a look at the case studies, take a step back. Can we talk of this through? You're not allowed to say that. That's going to be illegal. And if the child dobs you into the government, I assume you'll have the police knocking on your door. So this is just outrageous. It's like something from a police state. So no, we oppose it 100%.
So can we oppose it? For example, if you do hold the balance of power, is this something you can really oppose?
Well, we're
if
planning
they try
to,
and ban.
Well, Greg, we're planning to, and I think I made it clear that with the strongest possible conviction that we regard it as abhorrent. It's one of the worst proposals I've ever heard of.
Yeah, I just got an email from London, Mark, where the banning of praying and witnessing within clinics and what have you is now being passed, so you're not allowed to do any of that. For example, you can't even stand there in silence.
Yeah, well, they can say in New South Wales there's an exemption for prayer and preaching from the pulpit, but it's not about that. It's not about that. It's not. Whether the 13-year-old girl wanting to be a boy knows there's being prayers said for her in church or a sermon about her is nowhere near as important as what her parent says to her directly, what her religious leader says to her, the parish priest, the religious advisor says to her directly, or what a professional counsellor says to her directly trying to help her. It's about the kids, not about prayers and sermons in church.
So do you think Alex Greenwich will be introduced obviously in the first term of Parliament, do you think, or is it going to be more likely the second?
I don't know, Greg. Well, I've got to say, in terms of a communication line to Alex Greenwich, thankfully I haven't got one. I'm the anti-Greenwich. Whatever he proposes puts up normally, I oppose.
Thank you, Mark. All right, let's just move on to independent candidates. A couple of weeks ago, well, actually last week, I had a number of so-called independent candidates, Mark, on my webinar show. I had Robert Borsak, I had Milton Kane from the Christians for Community. I had a young lady, Millie Freeman, from the Liberal Democrats. Millie was a wonderful person. And of course, I had Sylvana Noel. Look, there are many other independent candidates, but do you think realistically, and as you said, no one's ever been elected independent to the upper house, but what's the reality of them standing, Mark?
Well, it's how the voters judge them, and I'm not here to pump up their tyres or let their tyres down. But I can say this, that those sorts of candidates, you run a risk, will they be elected? And if you voted for them and they're not in, and you're wanting to stop, say, the Greenwich agenda, well, you've wasted your vote. But if you vote for One Nation, you know you will get a good contingent of people elected to the upper house. We got 2 last time. We're hoping for 3 or 4 this time. So that's 5 or 6, a very important block of votes. So that's where you get the value is. And I think it makes sense to go with the strength of One Nation, our track record, our determination, and the fact that you know your vote will be productive in getting the right sort of person elected to Parliament. You vote for the minor, independent, random candidates, who knows? You might as well toss a coin as to whether or not they'll be successful. So you could waste your vote.
Mark, that allows me to ask you now, what are the chances of One Nation? I mean, are you in every state at the moment in Australia?
Yeah, we've got members. We've got members of Parliament in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria now, South Australia, the federal Parliament. So only in WA and Tasmania haven't we got anyone, and we're obviously trying to correct that. But I think you'll find One Nation in New South Wales will have the strongest result in the Commonwealth on Saturday. So getting with the strength on these traditional and conservative Christian issues is very important.
And Mark, I'm hoping, and I'm sure there will be, but your door will be open to representation, but in particular, not that we want to be, we being the electorate, knocking on your door every 5 minutes, but I think you'll find that there are a lot of social issues, moral and ethical issues that have not been addressed by the government in the last 10 years. I think that's an area that you'll probably find a lot of representation on. So in that, I mean, it's critical that you as a party form alliances with other groups. Can you give us an idea of, if that were the case, and let's say it was a hung parliament, who would you go with, Mark, or is that still something to be decided?
Well, if it's a hung parliament, Labor will sign up with the Greens, so we won't be touching that. And as for the Liberal Party, they'd need to get rid of their Green representative, Matt Keane, before we talk to them. So, you know, we're not keen on anything green, because normally it's an erosion of rights, freedoms, attacks on religion, attacks on parental rights, the sort of Greenwich agenda we've spoken about. So, you know, our record is very, very clear and our credentials are very strong.
Yeah, I mean, without committing you though, Mark, if you're approached by either of the leaders for whatever reason, let's say you really did well and you do have the balance of power, would you talk to both or no?
Well, Labor would be in alliance with the Greens, so we wouldn't touch that.
No, okay.
And the Liberal Party's being eaten alive by this cancer in their forces, Matt Keane, who is a Green. So we'd talk to the Liberal Party if they get rid of Matt Keane, the Green.
Yeah, because as you know, so many years ago, I mean, the Christian Democratic Party had the balance of power, and they were able to do a lot of negotiations. But
normally for the benefit of the government, but if they had the balance of power, where's the religious freedom law in New South Wales? Where's the parental rights law? I don't see anything they did with it.
No, those questions.
The government got benefits out of it. And what you know, I'm fighting for these laws now. If there was a time when they had the balance of power, they should have used it a bit more productively.
Yeah, no, that's a comment that a lot of others have mentioned as well. Mark, the other issue I want to have a quick look at is, in particular, you as the leader, is there any input as such? Now, I know the national leader is Pauline Hanson, but what role does she, as the founder of the party, have in relation to New South Wales politics, Mark?
Well, probably the same role that Peter Dutton has in the New South Wales Liberal Party. He's the national leader, and I'm sure he talks to Perrottet. He's not driving policy, and the same thing Albanese and Minns. So I talk to Pauline, but all our policies are relevant from the work we've done in the New South Wales Parliament. Yeah.
The other question that was emailed to me was, as you know, the euthanasia bill was passed 22, I think. We spoke about, I was appeared before Parliament, as you know. There is a review coming up, a mandatory review. Is there a case, is it possible to, in that review, to have the bill possibly repealed, do you think?
Well, if the review was to recommend that, there'd be people in the Parliament wanting to, but I think the practical impact of the Greenwich Bill was that it's the most complex, confusing, legalistic law that's ever been introduced. And I think the practical impact of it will be very unworkable. I think you have hardly anyone using the euthanasia provisions because they're so complex. And I said, nobody in the parliament advocating for it could stand up without notes and make a 10-minute speech and explain what the hell that thing was all about. You know, it was so confusing. So we'll see what the review says about that. But like a lot of these things, just because you change the law doesn't mean you're having a practical impact if the law is unworkable.
Mark, that's a good comment, because you know, we're preparing, getting ready for that review. I know we're doing a lot of homework at the moment, but the question I have for you now is, as you know, federally, you may know Alex Antic and Senator
I do, yeah.
Matt Canavan, you know of them.
I do, yeah.
They have introduced the Born Alive bill for babies that have survived due to a botched up abortion, or whatever you want to call it. Mark, is there a case for having something similar in New South Wales if they don't get through with their reintroduced bill at the federal level?
Well, there's a review of the abortion bill, and
Yep.
we'll see what comes out of that. And there's some big questions there about sex selection abortions, late term abortions. But Greg, realistically, we had that debate, we lost it. And there's only so much you can do in a parliamentary term. And I've set out a whole bunch of initiatives and legislation we're keen to move on. So I don't think that, you know, refighting that fight that we lost pretty heavily is a workable part of the agenda. We've got resources and opportunities to win things. Let's do the positive issues on religious and parental rights as the top priority, but also have a look at the review of the Abortion Act. I voted against it, and there's some major concerns there. So if the review echoes those concerns, confirms them, then let's try and act on them.
Yeah, no, totally understand. In terms of the electorate, Mark, you mentioned that Western Suburbs or Western Region was very much pro the conservative One Nation type view. How do you see the Teals faring in this particular New South Wales election?
Well,
given
the good news is the Teals aren't my problem.
No.
They're up in the North Shore. They're up in the North Shore of Sydney and Vaucluse, where we're not running, and they're not my problem. And obviously, I don't want to see any of them elected, but you know, I focus on the working people of Western Sydney and the Hunter Valley more than the Teals. So we'll see what the public decides. I don't think they're as successful as they were federally.
No, I understand. I think the Teals have a limited lifespan personally in politics, but
yeah, let's hope so.
Let's hope so. Mark, now what I want to do is just quickly a couple of more questions, and then we'll finish off, because I know you've got a busy night. You're still electioneering, and I don't.
I've got. You wouldn't believe how many. You know, a sign of a good campaign, Greg, is when lots of groups want to talk to you, and they're jumping out of the ground to talk to One Nation. So yeah, I've got some more commitments before I get a bit of shut eye.
I know, and we're very fortunate here at Christian Voice Australia to have you come in, because quite frankly, Mark, you know, you're and I'm not trying to be gratuitous, but you are a breath of fresh air in terms of conservative politics. Mark, two more questions, and then we're finished. In particular, with where you are at the moment, what's your prognosis for One Nation in terms of, you know, and I'm sorry, but we're going to go 4 years ahead. Are you working to make sure that you're going to have every seat a candidate in 4 years' time?
Yeah, well, we'd like to. We've doubled the number, you know, off our base 4 years ago, and we want to double again and have representatives and choice. But, you know, you want to build a party up methodically and carefully.
Yeah.
You can rush and go for 93 seats, and, you know, you've got candidates there who shouldn't have been running and discredit you. So we've been careful in our candidate selection. They're all running quality, strong campaigns, and we want to build up over time. So we're only just getting started, Greg. So give us more support, and we'll do an even better job.
All right, Mark, I'm going to, as I said to the other panel last week, and I said to them, look, you're in an elevator, Mark. You've got 30 seconds to give me your elevator pitch as to why, convince me why we should vote One Nation, Mark. 30 seconds, off you go.
Well, you know, you've got a party of fighters who stand up on the important conservative and Christian issues of religious freedom, parental rights, pushing back against the horrendous attacks on parents, the child abuse of gender fluidity, the need to ban it in the schools. Anything that's mainstream and common sense, One Nation is always at the forefront of the New South Wales Parliament fighting for it. We resent the left-wing woke agenda. We get up in the morning to fight them, and we fight them hard all day, and we'll continue that into the future.
Thank you, Mark. Look, I know you've said this many
Was
times.
that 30 seconds? That was pretty good.
Yeah, no, well, you've done well in the elevator. Mark, I know you've said this in the past before. I know you said you're not a Christian, but I think God works in mysterious ways, my friend.
Well,
But
some of those
like-
who say they're Christians are not much use on the Christian agenda. So if God sent me to do this work, at least I'm having a go.
Absolutely. God bless you. But Mark, can I just say in all honesty that a lot of people's present thoughts are with you. And that's not a gratuitous expression. That is something that we are praying for. Mark, good luck in the election on Saturday. May God literally be with you. And to answer the question, how in God's name should I vote? I think you vote according to your conscience and what you've heard tonight. So, Mark, God bless. All the best. And I hope to see you in Parliament in maybe on not Sunday, but possibly Monday. So God bless and thank you very much.
We'll be back for you. You'll know we're there. If we're back, you'll know we're there, Greg. I think that's the guarantee. We don't sit down the back saying nothing and watching the cows walk by. You'll know we're around. Don't worry.
Okay. All right. Well, this is being recorded. It's going on our website. I'll let everybody know so you can watch it again and listen to Mark's comments. Thank you very, very much again, Mark, and all the best for Saturday. God bless.
Appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Bye.